Hey everyone, I thought today I'd do a little bit of a different video than what I normally do on this channel. So, considering we just recently went through the developer time trials on Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled, I thought it'd be a little fun to create a little tier list and, I don't know, I guess rank the different tracks that I had to go through. So I've got only a few tiers here. I've got Torture, which that's pretty self-explanatory. These are going to be the hardest tracks in the entire game that took a lot of suffering to get through. I'm only thinking of putting like 5 tracks here. I think I know which ones are going to be going here, but we'll see as the video progresses whether or not I'm going to stick to 5. Challenging, this is going to be the step below Torture, so these are going to be tracks that I thought were challenging in their own right. They had some tricks to them, but they weren't necessarily as bad as the tracks I'll fall in the Torture category. Then there's Not Too Bad, which I'm viewing this as more like a category, kind of like grading as a C, where it's a track that I didn't find necessarily difficult nor easy. It's just like took some time to get through it, but didn't really require any intense amount of skill to get through. Just get through it, took a number of attempts, whatever. Then easy, tracks that took like 5 attempts or had like not a whole lot of technicality going through it. And then finally Retro Stadium, because you didn't have to do Retro Stadium to get the developer times or to get the wheels. And considering Retro Stadium is a PlayStation exclusive track, so if you're playing on Xbox or Switch, you're not going to play it. Also, the fact that it's also just a reskin of Turbo Track, so it would naturally fall wherever Turbo Track's going to fall on the list. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and put Retro Stadium there, since we don't have to even consider it. Now for the tracks, this tier list that I found on Tier Maker, it's Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled Complete Tracks Tier List Maker, straight to the point. The tracks weren't necessarily in order. They were kind of randomized, so I had to manually switch them up so that way it's in the normal track list in the game. So starting with Crash Cove, this was the first time trial that I ended up doing. I'd probably put it in challenging. It's kind of hard to judge it relative to the other tracks because I didn't know how bad this was going to be leading into it. It's very tight. The first lap is extremely difficult because you have to go through that first turn and hit that shortcut. And when you hit the shortcut, you have to get the jump boost coming out of that shortcut. You can't jump off the little ramp and then not get a boost and keep going because you instantly lose all your reserves. So the whole entire run depends on whether or not you can get that jump boost. And then after that, you just stick to the left side of the bridge and then the left side of the rock's face. Hit the boost pads and then just keep repeating that for 3 laps. The next one, Mystery Caves. This is one that I honestly don't really remember too much. The one thing that does come to mind is the turtles. The turtles aren't really consistent on whether or not they give you any bounce. So you have to drift through the turtles a lot of the times, or like in the case of that first shortcut towards the beginning of each lap, you have to hit the turtle either the left or the right side. I think went for the right because it was more consistent to get into the shortcut from there. We put in Not Too Bad. The tricky parts of that track were the turtles and also the fireballs towards the end, which you can kind of see in this preview here. But besides that, it was pretty straightforward, but not easy enough to land itself in easy. Sewer Speedway, not too bad. Do I put this above or below Mystery Caves? Probably below. I think with the velo times that helped with that track, because the velo times I spent a lot of time making sure I was consistent with the shortcut and also knowing the timings of the barrels. I think the barrels, if anything, is the most difficult part about that track. So once you get the timing down of that, that's pretty straightforward too. Roost tubes, easy. There's nothing really to say about roost tubes. It's just a simple figure 8. The only thing to note is that right before the finish line at that one shortcut, the ghost doesn't go into the innermost part of the shortcut. It goes around that like pole thing. So as long as you go inside completely, you can overtake the ghost pretty easy. So I think this only took like 5 attempts or something. Slide Coliseum. This is one of the more difficult ones. I'm leaning towards challenging or torture, but I think I just might put torture. This track, there's no boost pads. So all of your speed comes from whether or not you can hold your reserves and your power sliding. So That one I think took 40 minutes or so to beat the William P time, but the fact that he doesn't cut the corner in that final grass stretch right before the finish line really helps with that. But yeah, keeping your reserves through 3 laps is absolutely rough. Speaking of keeping your reserves, Turbo Track, that's the hardest track in the whole game. So yeah, if we had Retro Stadium to consider, we'd be putting Retro Stadium right there with Turbo Track. Turbo Track was the only track that took me longer than 2 hours to beat. In fact, it took me 5 hours to beat. You have to hit the boost pads exactly perfectly. Like, you have to know which boost pads to hit. You have to know the lines you have to make. So if you watch the video that I've done on Turbo Track, I'm very consistent, or at least attempting to be very consistent, every single move that I'm doing throughout every lap, which direction I'm drifting, how many boosts I'm getting before I jump into another drift, how many hops you have to do through that giant grass patch. U-turning through that U-turn section is just, it's a nightmare. The one saving grace with that track was William P, the time trial ghost, does not cut through the grass right before the finish line. So that gives you an opportunity to catch up to the ghost at the last minute, like ended up happening to me in my video. I got kind of lucky too because I lost reserves on that last lap, and that one grass patch really saved me. Coco Park, I'm putting it above Crash Cove. I don't know if that's typical of most people, but I found myself having more of an issue with Coco Park. It's like Ruse Tubes, where it's a very simple track. It's literally just an oval or a circle or deformed circle. The challenging parts of Coco Park were getting into the shortcut on the first part of every lap. There's a very tight window for boosting, or for drift boosting, power sliding, whatever the terms are, and keeping your reserves through the shortcut. So what would constantly happen to me is I would hop through the shortcut and lose reserves before I could even jump off of it. Or if I did have enough reserves, I would lose reserves on the next grass patch and lose all my speed. So Coco Park, I think, I don't remember what number this was, like what number track it was I went through, but it took a while to finally master, quote unquote master. I didn't really master in other tracks, but hopping through grass and maintaining your speed. So that large grass patch that you can see here in the preview, that was very difficult to constantly do. The ghost would usually go ahead of me there, but I think I barely managed to come out on top in the video. Tiger Temple was another one where you had to hop through the grass, but it was easier than Coco Park. The main concern is on the second lap. You have to, as you're passing the finish line, U-turn to the left around the wall and then hug this left side here where the grass is and then just hop through it. It took a few attempts to finally understand what I was supposed to do there, but it didn't take too long. But yeah, not as long as Coco Park. Papu's Pyramid, I don't really want to keep putting everything in challenging, but I'm going to have to. We'll see. Papu's Pyramid, not as bad as Crash Cove. But yeah, everything's going to challenging. I feel like that's going to be where a lot of the weight is. Papu's Pyramid, the challenge that I had was after you get through the pyramid section, the square spiral, the sharp left turns spiral, I would always lose reserves going through that grass patch after the pyramid section. I don't know why, but I constantly kept losing reserves in the same exact spot. But after I figured out what I needed to do on the first lap, because the first lap was always where I had an issue. The second and third laps weren't really an issue. I actually ended up moving that to not too bad now that I'm thinking about it, because that grass patch and the reserve is really the main issue. Once you manage to have enough reserves, which I think I figured out in the last 3 attempts what I needed to do, it's not too bad then. Dingo Canyon, let's see. This one's not too bad either, but it was easier than Papu's Pyramid. Yeah, I'd actually say easier than Mystery Caves even. This one doesn't really have a whole lot going for it. It's got a little bump towards the bottom of the downhill section that's a little tricky to deal with, but not too bad after that. Polar Pass, I didn't find it that challenging either, surprisingly. But I think most people would find it challenging. But it's not as challenging as Blizzard Bluff. We'll talk about that later. But Polar Pass, I don't really have a whole lot to say there. The issue with Polar Pass is keeping your blue fire. I normally don't have an issue with that. The issue that I had was laps 2 and 3 when you have your blue fire. There's that major shortcut after that figure 8 section, after that one seal that's going back and forth. You have to cut across the water. It took me a while to figure out what I needed to do there to get across the water consistently, but once I figured that out, it wasn't too bad. Tiny Arena, easy. Easier than Ruse Tubes even. This is probably the easiest time trial in the whole game. The computer ghost, I don't remember who that was. It wasn't William P. It was Alex B, I think. He constantly loses his reserves as he's going through Tiny Arena. The first attempt that I had, I lost my reserves 3 times and was managed to be tied with the ghost. At that point, I decided, no, let's just restart until we get a good run. But as long as you can keep your fire throughout the whole entire Tiny Arena, you're going to be like 5 seconds ahead of the ghost the whole time. Dragon Mines. It's not torture, because the only part of Dragon Mines that's difficult is the mine shortcut, the minecart shortcut. You have to build reserves properly. Literally, it's a very small window, just like Papu's Pyramid, of the amount of reserves that you can build leading up to that minecart shortcut, getting through the shortcut by hopping, and then hopping out of it. I frequently had it happen where I would lose reserves right before I hit the end of that minecart shortcut, and I would just jump, hit the fence, and then fall out of the map to my death and have to restart. Fortunately, the issue with Dragon Mines isn't the timing of the minecarts themselves going through that shortcut, because once you disable the intro cutscene, it's always the same path of where the locations of the minecarts are. So as long as you have the cutscenes disabled, the issue is getting through the shortcut and maintaining your speed and your reserves and then hopping out of it. Okay. I think I ended up losing my reserves at the end of the last lap too, but fortunately at that point I was a little bit ahead of William P and was able to secure the win. Blizzard Buff, Blizzard Bluff. This one took like an hour. I might end up putting it, it's borderline challenging, borderline torture. But I think I might end up putting it in challenging, because it took me 55 minutes to figure out how to hit the fence shortcut. The river shortcut's not too bad, but the fence shortcut took me a long time to figure out because you have to hop twice into it. You have to hop once over the snow that's where the shortcut starts, and then instantly hop again to maintain your speed. You can't just hop once into the shortcut, ride for a little bit, and then hop over the fence, because by that point, you have like no speed. You'd hit the fence, you'd like glide right on top of the fence, and then slowly hit to the other side. It's painful, but I think I finally figured out a way to make it semi-consistent. If you check out the video that I have, you can see the first lap was the perfect lap in how to hit that fence shortcut. The second lap, not so much. The third lap was usually what every attempt before that looked like. Just pitiful. Hot Air Skyway. We're getting towards the end of the regular Crash Team Racing tracks. Hot Air Skyway is challenging. It's not torture, because the issue... I'm going to put it below Dragon Mines. The issue with Hot Air Skyway is keeping your blue fire. The ghost itself isn't that bad, because all you really need to do in Hot Air Skyway is to keep your blue fire, know where the shortcuts are, and then cut to the inside of turns whenever possible. So, as long as you can do all that, you should be able to catch up to the ghost fine. Cortex Castle. I'm going to put this in not too bad. I might even put it... I'm going to put it right here, between Polar Pass and Papu's Pyramid. This only took me like 3 attempts, somehow. And I think it was because I found out in another video that with Cortex Castle, towards the end of every lap, there's that one boost pad that gives you blue fire. And right after the boost pad, there's a small ramp. That ramp is a separate boost pad that also gives you blue fire. So if you hit that standard boost pad and then hop into the ramp boost pad, you can get double the blue fire, which basically gives you enough reserves to go through every single lap without any issue. So yeah, it only took me 3 attempts because of that. So as long as you can U-turn fine, keep your blue fire. I would say normally cut corners, but I feel like with Cortex Castle, you don't even have to do that. Just keep your blue fire, keep your U-turns, and you should be fine. Engine Labs. I'm gonna put this in easy. No, that's actually a terrible place for it. I'm gonna put it not too bad. Engine Labs is one of the easier tracks I think to master in the game. It was one of the first tracks where I felt super confident being able to keep blue fire throughout the whole entire race. So do that, keep your blue fire. This is the case with literally every other track in this game. Cut your corners. I want to say the second lap, like around the finish line, the end of the second lap into the third lap, the Ghost loses their blue fire and they lose their reserves. So that's like a really good opportunity to try to overtake the Ghost, is the start of the third lap. So that makes that track a lot easier. I would put it in easy, but I think some people actually struggle with keeping their blue fire throughout the whole entire track. So this is going to be borderline, not too bad, and easy. Oxide Station, challenging. But where would I put it in challenging? Probably above Blizzard Bluff, now that I think about it. Because Blizzard Bluff, you just have to know how to do the fence shortcut and the river shortcut, and you'll be fine. Oxide Station, you have to keep your blue fire throughout every single lap. It's kind of like Engine Labs, though, because the Ghost loses their reserves and their blue fire towards the end of the third lap on that final turn. Because I think they hit a wall. So if you watch my video with Oxide Station, I was behind the Ghost for literally the whole entire race. But I was able to overtake them on that final section of the last lap because they hit the wall. So perfect opportunity for you to pass the Ghost and get the time. Now on to Nitro Kart, Inferno Island. This is going to be an easy one. Yeah, I'm going to put it actually the easiest ahead of Tiny Arena. This one I actually almost beat on my first attempt without even hitting the shortcut. You probably can beat it without hitting the shortcut because I feel like the shortcut doesn't even really save you much time. I just didn't want to risk it because you have to be so close to the insides of the turns to be able to do that. But yeah, it didn't take too long either. Same with Jungle Boogie, but Jungle Boogie is a little bit more difficult because you have to know how to air turn or U-turn coming out of the shortcut. Not much to say about Jungle Boogie. Clockwork Wampa. This one's tough. I think this is another one where a lot of people struggle with. I actually struggled with it for a little bit too. I'm going to put it below Crash Cove. What's to say here? You got to keep blue fire throughout every single lap, obviously. There's a couple of spaces I remember where you have to air brake or U-turn, whatever, to cut to the insides of some corners. Like you have to definitely U-turn when you are coming at the end of every lap to the finish line. You have to know how to keep your reserves too, because there are certain areas like around the, what do you call them, the gears, the time gears. You have to know whether or not you can drift boost around those and whether or not you're even comfortable with it. So like the first gear, I can usually drift boost around it, but the second one, I think it is, I normally can't because that's the one where you can easily just fall off the map. So I usually just don't do that. So yeah, this one's like a fine balance between maintaining your reserves to keep your blue fire, drift boosting, knowing when to drift boost, where to do it, how many boosts to get, and then U-turning and air braking. Same with Android Alley. This one's a pretty easy one though. I'd actually put it right here below Dingo Canyon. There's no blue fire, so you just have normal sacred fire, but you have to know to air brake and U-turn into certain turns, like coming out of where the train goes through the map, this little spiral section here in this preview, you have to air brake once around that, because otherwise you're going to drift way too wide around the turn. And also the section that kind of reminds me of Papu's pyramid section, where it's a bunch of right turns, you have to air brake around that a little bit too. But besides that, it's not too bad. Electron Avenue, this one wasn't that bad either, but I found it to be a little bit easier than Papu's pyramid. It's a very long track. I think the time I ended up getting was like 3:05, but it's very painful going through Electron Avenue and screwing up towards the end because it's the longest track in the game next to Tiny Arena. But unlike Tiny Arena, the Ghost actually is challenging. You're going to be keeping up with it practically the whole entire race. So there's quite a number of sections of air braking, U-turning, Fortunately, keeping your reserves and drift boosting isn't much of an issue because you get blue fire on practically every single turbo pad on this track. So knowing how to hit the shortcut with the first laser beams, being able to U-turn in the air around that turn, that's important. There's a couple of other air braking sections, a couple other U-turning sections, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Deep sea driving. This is challenging, I think. At least I think most people would consider challenging, but not... It's somewhere here. Where? Probably easier than Coco Park, in my opinion. So deep sea driving, I got a lot of experience with it with the velo times. I think I actually spent... No, not I think. I definitely spent more time on this track on the velo times than the developer times, because the velo times, like Sewer Speedway, wherever Sewer Speedway is, right? Whatever, I can't see it. But I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out the fan cycles. So I spent a lot of time in the velo trials going through that tube with the fans and constantly hitting the fans as I was going through every single lap. But I figured out, going through deep sea driving, I finally thought, okay, maybe if I'm not hopping into the inside of every tube turn, instead, what if I just kind of hold brake and hold down and then steer through the turns? And that actually helped a lot because you're able to see where the fans are a lot sooner and be able to predict where exactly you need to go. So I think deep sea driving only took like 3 attempts to do, kind of like Cortex Castle, but the fans are what keep it difficult because it's one of those things where you have to know exactly where you have to be in every single lap, and there's a lot more fans than there are barrels, so it keeps it tricky. Thunderstruck, another challenging track, but I don't think it's as bad as Blizzard Bluff. That might be shocking to some people. I'm going to put it here because the issue that I had with deep sea driving was the floggers, the spinning wood logs of death. Those things. When you're coming out, how do I even describe that? There's that one U-turb section with a turbo pad that I think gives you blue fire at the end of it, or it just gives you normal sacred fire and there's a blue turbo pad behind you, whatever. It's like right next to the finish line. And you hop through it. You have to cut the corner, go through a bunch of floggers and weave past them and air brake through that whole section. Literally, that section after that one turbo pad where there's like 3 or 4 floggers, that's just ridiculous. That whole section was very stressful for me because you hit the flogger, you instantly lose your reserves, you lose your blue fire, it's game over, you got to restart. So you just got to know how to air brake through the floggers, get around those, maintain your reserves. I found that last spiral section was very easy to lose my reserves because I would try to drift around it. And because I always run speed, I ran speed on everything except for, what was it? Drive Through Danger. That was the one track I ran through drift. But Thunderstruck with speed, you'd go right around the corner and you'd go around the outside and not the inside. You just hit a wall. So you'd have to kind of hop through it. You know, that turn right before the statue guys that are malleting you. So yeah, quite a bit of air braking, U-turning, keeping your blue fire, because this track is very difficult with keeping your blue fire, in my opinion. Kind of like Tiny Arena, or what is this? Tiny Temple? Not Tiger Temple? Whatever. Not too bad, because it's a short track. If this were a 2-minute long time trial, I'd put it in challenging, but because it was like a minute 20, it wasn't that bad. I'm going to put it below Polar Pass. This one was extremely... I actually might end up putting in challenging because of how tight the Ghost was. The Ghost is very tight. I think it's Vincent, the guy who plays Polar. He is very tight in keeping close to the insides of turns and knows exactly when to drift boost, knows how to air brake, knows how to air U-turn flawlessly. So I was only a few tenths of a second, I think, faster than him in the time. And it was not an easy track. Actually, I take that back. It should be an easy track because of the simplicity and nature, kind of like Coco Park in that sense. But because of how fast you're moving and the fact that the game's only running at 30 frames per second, I felt like there was a lot more motion blur than there should have been on this track. And I found it extremely hard to focus and to be precise with my actions. So, Meteor Gorge, not bad. Actually, I'm going to put it in easy. Right there. Barin Ruins. I tied with the Ghost here, so not too bad. Actually easy, I'm going to say. But probably the hardest of the easy ones. Out of time, this is a torture one. This one you have to do a lot of management of your reserves, air braking, hitting shortcuts consistently. Everything is tested. And out of time, it's just absolutely absurd. This is probably top 3 tracks in terms of difficulty. I'm going to say it's more difficult than Slide Coliseum. It's just like, what was that Tiny Temple, whatever it was called, where the motion blur is a huge factor and the 30 frames per second is really difficult too. There's just a lot of technique required for you in that track, and William P does not give you any breaks at all throughout the whole entire track either. Assembly lane, this one's pretty easy. The only difficulty is the conveyor belt with the thing smashing you. So I'm going to say it's easier than Barin Ruins, but harder than Ruse Tubes. Because it's kind of a lengthy track. It's like 3 minutes. Well, 2 minutes 50. I can't remember the exact time. Hyperspaceway, the easier end of challenging. I think more people online, from what I've seen, find it to be a more difficult track, but I didn't find it that bad. Navigating the figure 8s is a little tricky, but that's just air braking, U-turning, whatever it's called. You have to keep your reserves too. I constantly had the issue of losing my reserves right after the figure 8 and right before the blue fire on the last lap. So you have to squeeze in a few extra drifts than you would actually like. Now the bonus tracks, Twilight Tour. I don't know where to put this. This one's actually pretty easy. I'm actually end up putting it easy because of that. But not as challenging as Barin Ruins. It's pretty straightforward. The difficulty in Twilight Tour is coming out of the shortcut, there's that one boost pad right before the ramp. It's kind of easy to miss the boost pad and hit the wall instead, so just be mindful of that. And then the turn after that, towards the shortcut or towards the finish line, you have to cut towards the inside and not drift too wide to hit the wall. Prehistoric Playground. That's a challenging one, but not as challenging as some other tracks. I'm going to say it's more challenging than Tiger Temple, but not as challenging as Coco Park. Again, that might be a surprise to some people, but I found Prehistoric Playground to be the perfect track in the game in terms of difficulty. Because there's air braking that's required of you. There's some U-turning, but not a whole lot. You have to know how to keep your reserves. There's a lot of good drift sections. The only difficult part might be after the shortcut at the beginning. You go around that one turn, you jump off the dinosaur tail, and you have to jump where the palm tree is, where the rock is. Like, that's probably the most difficult part in the whole track. But the rest is pretty straightforward. Spyro Circuit, this tests your air braking skills tremendously. I don't remember where the ghost was on this one. I don't remember if the ghost was far behind or what. I think it was like a second or 2 behind at the final time. But it is a challenging track. We're going to put it here. There's quite a bit of air braking in this final section before the finish line. That can be a little tricky, but everything else is pretty straightforward. Nina's Nightmare. Okay, this was a track I had like no experience with before the developer times. So I actually had to learn the track as I was doing the developer time, because I actually got kind of lucky with the Velo time trials. This one's on the upper end of challenging. I'd probably put it here for me personally. There's reserves management a little bit. It's got a fence shortcut kind of like Blizzard Bluff, but it's not as bad. Yeah, getting ahead of the ghost was the major concern in this track, I remember. Because I couldn't figure out for the life of me how to get ahead of the ghost on the first lap. I had to rely on the second lap as I'm barreling down past the finish line on that second lap. The start of the second lap and the first lap. So yeah, I just kind of relied on that throughout the whole entire time trial. Now, Koala Carnival. This was torture. I'm going to have to say that's torture. This track was a nightmare. The giant jump that you have to do... Okay, let me rephrase. Let me restart. The first 15 seconds of the track is the hardest part to begin with. You have to hop from the finish line down that slope at a specific time, so that way you're hitting the slope exactly when the ghost does. For some reason, a little bit later or a little bit sooner gives you less time to beat the ghost than you just doing exactly when he jumps. And that giant jump right after that downhill section was extremely inconsistent, and you have to hit it every single lap. So that way you can get ahead of the ghost, so that way you can get some boost, that way you can maintain your reserves, all that. That final section, that final tunnel, you just have to stick to the inside, and I think the first and the third lap, there's one boost pad at the beginning of that tunnel section that you can hit and get a little bit of extra speed. But yeah, I would definitely consider that torture just because of that, the first 15 seconds alone. Gingerbread Joyride, we're on the final 3 here. This is challenging, but also not too bad. It's actually easier than I thought it was going to be. There's a couple of tricky sections in this one. Like, for example, getting that first boost pad at the beginning of the first lap is very tricky. And maintaining your reserves up until the blue fire pad's kind of tricky. That first shortcut's tricky. But everything else is straightforward. You get lucky with the gummies on the end of every lap because they're always in favorable positions if you're keeping up with wherever the ghost is. So the gummies are never going to be in the middle of the track. They're always going to be on the 2 left and right sides. So yeah, not too bad. Mega Mix Mania, torture. This one was bad, but I actually enjoyed it. It's kind of like Prehistoric Playground where I was actually enjoying replaying it. You have to maintain your blue fire. You got to keep drift boosting. You got to know when to drift boost. You have to know when to hop inside of corners, all that. It's like Coco Park and Tiger Temple where I was struggling to hop through the dirt. If anything, this is the track I was having the most difficulty with jumping through the dirt on. I think it's a fine placement for action. I'm going to move Slide Carnival down. But yeah, jumping through that dirt section where the fans are after you get the blue fire, I could never hit consistently. So I'd always let William P overtake me on the dirt section. But then I'd be able to gain up on William P in other sections of the track. So going through the ship, for some reason, I found time to gain up on William P. Jumping out of the ship, for some reason. In the ending, I don't know why. But after the minefield, for some reason, I think he takes the turns a little bit wide on the first, second, and third lap. So as long as you're sticking to the inside of the turns, you should be fine with that. Drive Through Danger. This is another torture track, but I end up putting it there. This one was the only track I had to switch engines on. So every other track I was using the speed engine, but this one I had to switch to drift because certain turns, honestly, I don't even know how to describe certain sections of this track because there's so many twists and turns here. But there's this one turn, the giant turn towards the end of every lap, where you go through the large turn and then you kind of hop out of the track towards the end, if you know what I mean. That section was extremely difficult to pull off on speed. I would always just do one boost and then constantly have to hop the rest of it, and I would just lose reserves. So drift is easier for that section and the beginning spiral as well. Those two, actually, okay. The end section I was just explaining, the beginning spiral leading up to that first blue pad, and the section where you go through that small narrow building with no collision for whatever reason. It's got like blue poles or something, I don't know, in it. Like that section, you turning out of that was very tricky, especially since I don't know how, but that wasn't saving me any time compared to the Ghost. The Ghost was always catching up to me there. So yeah, those sections were very tricky to constantly pull off. It's a very difficult track to do consistently to begin with because of all the turns that you have to do. It's a very windy, kind of like Slide Calls. Actually, no, the best track to compare it to is Hot Air Skyway. It's Hot Air Skyway, but on steroids. But can be a fun track, casually. So yeah, we didn't do 5 tracks. We did 6 for Torture. But I think it looks pretty good. I think this is a good balance of what I expected the tracks to be. I actually expected there to be less and not bad and easy. I expected there to be a lot more and challenging. But yeah, I think this turned out pretty good. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys think of all the developer time trials in Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled, where you'd place everything. Did I place something to be too easy or too difficult, and where you would have put it? Let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, check out the developer time trials playlist I made if you want to see all the tracks I end up going through. Thank you for watching.